Today is April 6, 2005, and we are conducting a Veterans History Project interview in conjunction with the Library of Congress. I will be interviewing today Mr. Darwin Dodds. Thank you for coming to the museum, sir.
You're welcome.
Also present in the room during the interview will be Alice Hill, the filmer, myself, Sue Paul, as the interviewer, and Carolyn Burgess. Sir, could you please tell us where you were born and the year that you were born?
May 2nd, 1919, here in Meridian, Idaho.
And could you tell us which war you served in and what division of the military?
World War II. I was a civilian on Wake Island working for Morrison Knudsen Company.
Darwin, you were born in Meridian, Idaho in 1919?
Right.
Could you tell us a little bit about what Meridian, Idaho was like at that time?
At that time, 1,000 was population. I mean, Main Street was a dirt road, and my father was the president of the Meridian State Bank. So I had a pretty nice childhood. I used to gather magpie eggs, get 2 cents apiece from the county because they were such a menace to the farmers. And I would come home after school when I went to school, come home, get my shotgun, my dog, go out and get 2 pheasants right across the street from us practically. And I couldn't believe years ago when I came back to Boise and Meridian, how Meridian especially has grown.
Did you have brothers and sisters?
2 sisters, both older sisters. They're both still living, but both are in the Valley View Care Center in Boise.
And you went all the way through high school then at Meridian?
No, I went 8 years primary school and 2 years high school, then moved to Boise and graduated from Boise High 1937.
So you went to high school where?
2 years here and then 2 years in Boise.
Okay, why Boise?
Well, my father, during the gold, what was it, in 1933, they recalled the gold or something, and he got out of the banking business and went into real estate. So he had a chance to go with Sudler Wegner in Boise, and did, and we moved to Boise in 1933.
1933. And what year did you graduate from high school?
37.
Were you in sports, or what was your,
yeah, I was in track and had my letter in track.
I see. What did you do after you graduated from high school in 37?
I went to work in a radio station, which then it was KDSH in Boise, and later became KBOI, and followed my career for the next 40 years as a radio broadcaster. Actually, I started when I was 18 at the only station in Idaho, KIDO, which was an NBC station. And I was working as an announcer when I went overseas. But my salary as an announcer was $20 a week, and on a week it was $125 a month. So that kind of money was a lot of interest in those days.
Did you marry at that point?
I was married, but she heard I was beheaded in Tokyo, so she got a divorce. And soon after I got home, I did marry my school days sweetheart.
How did you end up going overseas?
Well, as I say, we heard, because Morrison Knudsen's main office was in Boise on Broadway, and we had heard they were paying fabulous salaries if you could stand the loneliness on Wake, Palmyra, Johnson, Guam, Midway, or Cavite in the Philippines. They were all under the conglomerate of the 5 companies, which Harry Morrison was a big part.
And who were the 5 companies? Do you know who they were?
I wish you hadn't asked.
But Morrison Knudsen was one of them.
Morrison Knudsen was the main one.
And so this was what year that you heard
1941.
About? And you would have been about what, about 22 years old, maybe?
No, I was 21 when I got on Wake Island, April 13th, Easter Sunday of 41.
How did you, I'm sorry.
I wasn't 22 until the next month.
How did you travel to Wake Island?
On the USS Wharton, which was an old tub that belonged to Admiral Byrd on one of his expeditions. And then from Honolulu to Wake, they had two ships, the William Ward Burroughs and the Regulus. I was on the Regulus, and that was a tiny island, 14 feet above sea level at the highest, 10 miles all the way around this horseshoe, which was 3 islands actually, Wilkes, Wake, and Peel.
How much were you being offered in salary?
$465 according to salary, food allowance, and bonus.
Per month?
Per month.
That was quite a bit of money in 1940.
In 41, that was a fortune.
What did your folks think about your doing this?
They didn't want me to go, neither did my wife, but that kind of money, I thought more, if I can get it in good with Morrison Knudsen, we had heard that, you know, the people went up the level there in good fashion.
And what were they doing on these islands, these 5 companies?
They were building Pacific Naval Air Bases as an outside perimeter to protect the Hawaiian Islands and the West Coast. If you look at that, now Wake Island is 2,500 miles due west of Honolulu.
Down just over.
And it's part of that defense perimeter. If you notice, if you drew a circle from the Philippines around this way, then you've got a defense on the outer islands, defending against the Marshalls and Roy and the Japanese-held islands.
Now this was in April of 41.
April 13th of 41.
And did you have inclinations, or did you feel a tide of war coming?
Absolutely not.
Nothing. So you had no fear about taking this job?
They told us at Morrison Knudsen that this was a lot more important than any propaganda we might have heard about a war, because building a defense perimeter was a last-ditch effort to get these islands fortified before anything happened. But I think America at the time thought that the Japanese would attack Java or the East Indies, but not Pearl Harbor and the Wake and the Philippines.
Did you know anyone else that, did anyone go with you that you knew?
Very definitely, yeah. I was one of 46 men on the bus that left in March, left Morrison Knudsen's office and headed for Alameda.
In Boise, Idaho?
In Boise. Then in Alameda, most of the guys on the bus were sent to Wake Island, but we didn't know till we got our contracts which of the islands we'd go to, Palmyra, Johnson, Guam, Midway, or Wake.
And you were assigned to Wake?
All of the Idaho men were assigned to Wake.
So you were put on board the ship and off you went?
No, we had 2 days rest in San Francisco and then got on the Wharton.
This is a picture of you at that time.
Yeah, 1941.
You have not changed much at all, I must say. Were you excited?
Very excited. This was an adventure that you know, very seldom heard about. And all we knew was a tiny island out in the South Pacific, and we'd get a bonus starting with the 6th month, the 6th, 7th, 8th month. It was up to $90 bonus.
How long did it take before you arrived on Wake?
Let's see, I have 7 days to Hawaii, and then they got me right on the Regulus, so it was about 13 days.
So by the end of April you were there?
I was there on the 13th of April,
13th of
Easter
April.
Sunday.
And what did it look like? Tell us about when you first got to Wake Island.
Terribly lonely and terribly small. It was covered with birds. We had 5 or 6 different kind of birds on Wake Island. And one in particular, the kiwi bird, which couldn't fly, and we had a bunch of kangaroo rats, and they were terrible. They'd crawl on your face at night, or you know.
Were there any facilities there at all when you got there that had already been started?
No. Well, I'm sorry. The Pioneer Party had arrived in January, but they had nothing to our canteen was a couple of bottles of Coke, 2 packets of gum, and maybe a box of cigars. That was it. And eventually, Harry Morrison wanted to keep all those men on Wake Island because it cost so much to send them back home and retrain and send someone out. So he did everything possible, building a soda fountain for us, a library, having a picture show 4 nights a week that brought in by the Navy, and modern music, I mean up-to-the-date music by recording. And he did everything. The food was incredible. $1.51 per man per day in 1941. And we had fresh meat, fresh vegetables, fresh eggs, brought over on the huge reefer boxes on the ship, plugged into their electrical supply, and then when they got them on Wake, plugged into our supply of electricity.
What were you trained to actually do on the island?
I was head field timekeeper.
And that means what?
That means going out and checking to see that the men are working on what project and how many hours a day they spent doing that. And for example, we had cement finishers there. Once they started the cement pour, they didn't dare quit till it was finished. It might be 3 o'clock in the morning before that was finished. And that all became part of a big ramp to run submarines up, dry dock them, and repair. So Wake was very important. And on this picture, you'll see this is the runway we constructed. It would handle B-17s, the big 4-motored planes, and they came through and landed and then refueled and went on to the Philippines. And when just before war broke out, we had 12 new Grumman fighters, F-4Fs, Wildcats. And I hope I'm not getting ahead of myself, but when the war broke out, we lost 8 of those the first day.
Did you see them flying in and out? How long did it take to construct that runway?
Well, it took us 18 months because, I mean, it had started, and then they brought in a crew from Midway called the Black Gang, and they put the tar and rocks down for the runway. So our part of it was maybe 5 or 6 months, but total it was about 18 months that they were working on it.
And so during the time that you were there, before the capture, how many projects were actually being done? What was happening? It sounds like a pretty active
We were
island.
way ahead of the contract. We had the airstrip, we had the submarine ramp to dry dock submarines, and bachelor officers' quarters, structural steel. There would be housing all the Navy men coming in after we were finished. They had hoped that by Christmas of 1941, we would have 1,200 civilians on Wake Island.
What was your tour of duty, so to speak? How long had you contracted to be there?
9 months. Okay. And my contract was up the same day the Japanese put me on the hell ship Nita Maru and shipped me off to nowhere. 12th of January, 1942.
Let me ask you about November of 1941. You must have had two-way radios or some kind of correspondence with the outside world. Did you at that point? Was there any indication that there was something coming? Well,
we wondered at the time, but I guess we were too naive to really think that the Japanese would attack Wake Island. We had a little weekly newspaper called the Wigwag, and Louis Cormier, the editor, used to get the broadcasts from San Francisco, and he'd print it. You know, you could read between the lines, but never once did I feel that the Japanese were going to attack Wake Island. Even the morning that they hit Pearl Harbor, we buffooned it and said, oh, nobody's stupid enough to try and attack that rock, meaning Pearl Harbor.
Tell me about December 7th, 1941. Did you receive news on this island that the attack had happened that day?
We did. Of course, we're over the international date line. It's December the 8th on Wake Island. And we got the broadcast, and it said officers and men were maimed and killed, and we knew then. That was 11:30 in the morning. And the next thing you know, 36 Japanese planes came over the Pan Am base and destroyed that, another 36 over the airstrip, and they had turned, and I swear you could reach up and pat the guy on the shoulder. They were that low.
What did you think?
I was scared to death. I don't know what I thought, but I thought, get me out of here.
Where did you go? Where did you try to hide?
I ran down 8 steps twice. I mean, two times. Once 4 and another 4, and then flat on the ground, lying down, hoping that they wouldn't see me. And I could feel dirt stitching the ground over my shoes.
What were the other men around you doing?
Trying to get out of the way. Of course, we had no forewarning at all that Wake was going to get bombed, and when we saw the planes coming in, one corporal said, "Are they friendly?" And another one says, well, they're dropping their wheels, which were bombs. And he says, the wheels are falling off the plane. Next thing we know, these terrible explosions, they hit a 25,000-gallon high-octane gas tank, and it went up in a pall of smoke and a big boom. And
what about the runway? Did they hit the runway with bombs?
They hit the runway and tore it up.
So obviously they were not intending to land. They were just bombing the island.
Bombing the island. However, in days that followed, they didn't bomb the powerhouse or the water supply, so we knew that they were going to try to land. And on December the 11th, they tried a full-scale landing, and we repulsed it.
How did you do that?
By waiting till the ships got into 4,000 yards from 9,000, and then opening fire and sinking, I think, 3 or 4 capital ships.
How many military men were on the island?
495.
So tell me how they organized all of you civilians to become military people. I mean, to basically start fighting with the military.
We were the only mobile force because the Marines were assigned a position. And I mean, if you were assigned a 50 caliber machine gun here, you stayed with that gun. We could take the meals and coffee and go from gun to gun, taking ammunition or sandbags or whatever they needed. They found out we were the only mobile force, and lots of times, for example, the gun I was on, a Battery D on Peel, one sergeant and all the rest civilians, because there were that many. We were trying to save our own, if you'll pardon me, skinny little butts rather than be honorable. I mean, we weren't thinking about anything but ourselves at the time.
Survival.
Survival, that's right.
Was everyone that worked for Morrison Knudsen willing to participate?
As far as we know, there's rumors on both sides that a lot of the people went out and just tried to hide in the bush, and there was no forewarning of what we should do in case, but when we gathered, they asked us to gather at the BOQ every afternoon at 3, and then they would assign us where we were needed most. For example, on the first night after the original bombing, we all went to the airport to clean out the debris and to build revetments for the other 4 planes that we still had. And I think every civilian on the island was out there that night.
Did you have hopes that an American ship would be coming soon to pick you up and get you out of there?
Very definitely. That was the rumor, and it was true. Saratoga was on the way with 36 more airplanes, and I don't know how many Marines to help us, and ammunition and supplies. And they said they would take all the civilians off at that time. Well, I'll never forget, on the 21st of December, they had a raid from Japanese carriers parked outside a little ways. And Bobby Doyle and another man and I were helping build a new defense center, and this wild coral all packed around, and it shows up like a gas light, you know, shiny. Anyway, we saw planes coming in from a distance, and this Bobby Doyle waved and said, "Oh, they're American planes," until it went up like this, and you saw the rising sun on the wing. He went up about 600 feet and came right straight down and missed us because he let the bombs go when he was pulling out of the dive. And that was about the closest. I still have scarred teeth. And
so the Japanese didn't actually take the island until the 11th of January? Is that what you said? When did the Japanese actually arrive on the island?
23rd of December.
23rd of December.
We lasted 16 days. And the Japanese later in World War II said that the defeat they had on Wake Island was the most humiliating of the whole World War II for them.
That you held them at bay for that long?
Yes.
16, you know, this
16 days.
400 military men and the
1,200
civilians.
1156 actually.
Yeah.
But
did you ever give up hope? I mean, until the Japanese arrived, did you still believe?
I don't think I didn't. I don't think any of them did.
What about food and water?
Oh, we had plenty.
You had plenty.
In fact, we were in the process of burying a lot of canned food and things in case, you know, that we got cut off from our supply, and the Japanese made us go out and find those things. And number 2 can of pineapple, they'd open it up and eat the whole thing.
Did you have military commanders that organized this? You as civilians organized you, and so that there was leadership. You had a real sense of leadership.
Well, we had good leadership
time?
from our superintendent, Dan Teeters, who worked closely with Commander Cunningham and Major Devereaux.
Did Mr. Morrison know that this happened? And did you have any signal?
He
from
not
him or
only knew, he said he would send 4-motored planes out there to pick up all the civilians and pay for it if they would release the civilians. And the Navy said, mind your own business. They are important to the island. And they wouldn't let him come near the island.
My gosh. So the Navy itself kept you there,
right,
captured more or less until they could solve the problem themselves.
Right.
Would you tell us about the day the Japanese arrived on the island?
That was December 23rd, and it started out real scary. I mean, flashes of light out to the horizon, and then we saw these, looked like a Roman candle with a red fireball up in the air, which evidently was a guide for Japanese that had landed on Peel Island. And we were very uneasy because he had a lot of rain squalls that morning, and it was pitch black, and you could see the Marine Guard out there with his poncho in the rain, you know, silhouetted. And it was scary because we knew that the Japanese were going to take that island. There were 82 ships surrounding Wake Island that morning, and we were a real thorn in their side. So they weren't about to let us get away with another humiliating defeat.
And so they arrived and came on shore.
Came on shore several places, in rubber boats primarily, and then they docked 2 patrol boats up on the south shore of Wake Island. Just ran them over the reef and right up.
Tell me about what you saw your first time when you saw the first Japanese and what you felt about that.
Well, I was, as I say, petrified because these people, everything are backwards. When we saw these first Japanese and walked out on the road actually to surrender, this guard goes like that, which to me is goodbye. So we turn and walk the other way until a shell went over our heads, and we decided this is the wrong thing to do. So we turned around and came back to him. Now, this guard picked us up, 4 of us, and got us in the back of pickup, and there were two great huge balls of wire, and we decided they were going to hang us from the bridge. And in the meantime, a Japanese officer turned this pickup around and made him go back to the airport, which we were all on the airport naked, hands tied behind us with telephone wire, and machine guns trained on us. And out there in the tropics where that sun beat down on that white coral, and it was stinging.
All of you on the island, all Americans were
all
taken
Americans
there.
are still alive.
How long did it take for that to happen, for them to get all of you? How long did all this mayhem?
About 2 days.
It took about 2 days.
And
how many
then
men were killed?
70. And out of those, 35 civilians. So it was about even up. Actually, I think the civilians lost more men on wake than the Marines did. But
so you were left for how long in that condition?
We were left out there until Christmas Eve, and then taken back to the barracks in Camp 2, which were surrounded by barbed wire, and they hadn't bombed the barracks, so we knew they had planned to come live in them, and they did.
Where did you live?
Underneath the barracks. And
you dug it out?
Dug it out, and there were barracks were all up on stilts, you know, so we could find a place to take a blanket and get under there and get a little shut-eye.
So they let you just find a place to...
They let us, however, there were barbed wire all over, around the compound now, and we weren't going anywhere. There's no way in the world to go anywhere off Wake Island.
You'd never been around Japanese people before.
No.
What were your captors like? How did they behave toward...
Small and very arrogant, and slap you around at the slightest indication that you did something wrong. Lots of times you'd get hit and wonder why. And when we got on the Needham Rue, the hell ship, later in the month of January, my buddy, Bernie Goff, started to say something, and this guy hit him with a club and just rocked the ship. It hit him so hard. And Bernie said, you know, what did I do? And then they showed us a list of rules. You shall not talk. You shall not take more blankets than given you. And all these rules and regulations. And they always ended up, we shall not try to kill all of you.
Was that threat given to you from the very moment they came onto the island? So you knew your life was at stake? In
fact, when we were on the airport and the machine guns trained on us, we thought they would kill us all and put us in these airplane revetments we had dug and then just bury us all at once. And until they got word from Tokyo not to kill us, we didn't know that our life was that close to being over.
Your family didn't know that Wake Island had been taken then?
Actually, no, not for 6 months.
It was kept pretty quiet.
And they really didn't know. For example, there were lots of people, the one from Nampa, Idaho, Fritz Schaefer, his picture was on the front page of the Statesman, killed in action. Well, Fritz didn't die till a couple of years ago, and it was home and healthy. And his son, Bob Schaefer, is one of our main members. Anyway, another, Joe McDonald, a fine lawyer from Reno, Nevada, was listed as killed in action, and he was alive. So they got a lot of errors and mistakes, but our family really didn't know till they got their first postcard from us in prison camp 6 months after we were captured, because they didn't take any names or anything as far as capture was concerned.
It was, then you had just about, 2.5 weeks before the ships started taking the prisoners to Japan.
Yeah.
Tell me about the day you were put on the ship, on the ships.
That morning, which was the 12th of January, they called us out on the parade ground, and this Japanese had papers that they interrogated us, you know, and he went through and he says, when your name's called, go back to your barracks, pack your personal things in a pillowcase and wait for us, which we did. They called out all the names were 300 civilians. All the Marines would go, and 750 civilians.
Why didn't they take everybody?
We'll never know. I guess they wanted to continue to build fortifications on Wake Island.
The 300 that were left behind never survived, did they?
No, well, 200 of them were taken off the island in October and taken to prison camps in Japan. 98 that were left there were executed in October of '43.
Tell us about the day that you were put on board the Hell ship that you...
Okay, that was the 12th of January in 1942. And I remember these dates because later on, you know, there was something associated with it. And like my friend's birthday when we got to China and so forth. Anyway, the Nita Maru was a beautiful ship, an NYK liner, but they put us down below the water decks and packed in there like sardines. And the admonishment, if you take more than 2 blankets, we'll kill you. And
how many men were put below with
750 in this one hole I was in. You couldn't even turn.
Did you have beds to put your blankets on?
No, steel deck. And our meals twice a day, we got a dead fish. I almost said petrified, I mean dried. And a gruel, no seasoning in it, twice a day. And then our sanitation facilities, 5-gallon can in each corner of the hold. And you could look up, I mean way up, to see the cover on the hole that we were in. And I didn't find out till later, but one of the other holes, one of the Japanese guards that lost a brother on Wake Island went down in the steps and pointed to 5 guys, took them upstairs and beheaded the 5 of them. And we didn't know that till later. Fortunately, no one from our hole was beheaded. But we were beaten every day, and they were searching for rings, watches, and don't ever let them tell you that American money isn't good anywhere, because that old paper dollar bill was magic to these people.
But there was no bargaining with them. They just came and took what they wanted.
They came and took it.
Yeah.
And beat Halbert.
How long were you on the island in the ship before you actually before the ship actually started for Japan?
I would say a couple of hours, because we went right out to the waterfront, got on barges, got in the companionway of the ship, and started upstairs. That's when we got the first beating.
How did all of the men with you behave toward each other? Did you try to help each other, or were you in shock?
Very definitely. No, there's a bond there that can't be crushed. I mean, it's wonderful the way they wanted to help you, and especially if you were bleeding from a cut or a bounce on the head or whatever.
When you say they beat you, would they come down and indiscriminately just start hitting people, or were you taken out one at a time?
No, they would come down and make you stand up, and usually put your hands up on the wall, and then beat you in the back or where it really hurt.
Could you show us on the map where the ship was taken from Wake Island?
I'll try to. Show me China.
Right there.
All right, it was taken to the China and a place called Wusun.
Mm-hmm. So if we go to Wake Island, down to Wake, and then come up.
13 days.
13 days.
Now, the picture you have there, that was on the ship 3 days out of Wake Island when they landed in Yokohama. And most of us were kept down below, but these people were brought up for propaganda shoots, probably given a candy bar or a cigarette to get them to smile, and the rest of us knew absolutely nothing about it at the time. We knew that our journey was 13 days from Wake Island to when the ship stopped. We got out of the ship and had to kneel in a platform of disinfectant. It was snowing. We were soaking wet with summer clothes on. And then we go down and listen to a little Japanese colonel tell us, "You're now prisoners of the Japanese Navy," before it had been the Army. Then we were taken to our first camp at about 6 miles from this dock at Wusang. And I'll never forget my good friend John Rogie standing next to me in line. He tapped me on the shoulder after this guard had told us we would go to our cottages. Anyway, he offered me a brand new cigarette out of a pack of Chesterfields. And I said, "How in the hell did you get through with the pack?" That he put it in the top of his sock and wandered around and had it matches, and everyone in that line started smoking, and the Japs did nothing about it. But I went into orbit because I hadn't had a cigarette for 13 days.
How did you know it was 13 days? You were kept in the hold of the ship. How did you all keep track of how the days and the nights?
I really don't remember. I imagine by days and nights and marking on the wall if we could. But
how many men did not survive that voyage? Do you know?
Probably 50.
50 died on that trip.
On that trip, because there were lots of them were injured severely on Wake Island, and there were no doctors to stay with them. They put them right on the ship and mixed them in with the rest of the guys.
And so when someone died, did the Japanese remove them from the hold, or were they left there until you died?
They were removed and thrown in the ocean.
So you arrived in Japan, and tell us about where you...
No, we arrived in Wusang, China.
In Wusang, China, I'm sorry, in Wusang, China with Japanese. And
yes.
Tell us about that then, when you were...
Well, it was an old rundown barracks that had belonged to the British cavalry units, a horse barn, and dirt floors, the windows broken out. It was cold, January 24th, and we walked all night long up and down the halls to keep from freezing, I think. And we stayed there in those barracks for exactly 1 year. In December of the following year, 42, they moved us closer to Shanghai to Kangwon, China. And there's where we were headquartered to build a replica of Mount Fuji, which they told us was going to be an amusement park, and turned out to be a rifle range for the Japanese. And we worked on that thing, 500 of us, day and night, hauling dirt in little mining cars, and then moving the track as we went up the mountain. We get up on the top and ride down in those cars at 90 miles an hour. And the Japanese just got furious because a lot of broken legs and arms, you know, guys running off the track. And we were forbidden to ever ride them down. So we would wait till the interpreter got on the other mountain, other side of it, and then it would ride down this side. It was fun. So
you did find some things to maybe laugh about if you could.
And that's the thing that got us through. We looked at the lighter side every time. We tried to imagine things that would not get us beat up in the head, you know. There was one interpreter, we said, "You look like a movie star." And he said, "Oh, what movie star?" "Mortimer Snerd." And he, you know, he was fine till he found out who Mortimer Snerd was. Then he just beat heck out of us. And the little guy, that was our colonel, we called him Mickey Mouse, Colonel Yusey. He was only about 4 feet 11 high. Anyway, we had things to do, and we knew how far to take them before they became, you know, dangerous. And we always looked on the lighter side of things. The Japanese had a funny rule. If one man in the camp did something wrong, the whole camp was punished. We might go without food for 3 days because one man tried to get food out of the warehouse or something. And this one Marine, North China Marine, had a shaving mirror, about a 6-inch square shaving mirror. our cigarette ration was 3 Chinese cigarettes a day when they remembered them. Anyway, this guy with a mirror went around with a shoebox and a mirror. You could look at yourself for 30 seconds for 2 cigarettes. And he had a shoebox full of cigarettes. You know,
just
we
to
had
see yourself.
Well, we
course.
hadn't seen for 6 months. We hadn't seen our ugly face. Anyway, things like that. And
how many men stayed with you that you can think of in that compound then that full year? Was it the same group from the ship?
Same group.
Were other people brought there?
No, but other people were transferred out of there. They'd take 400 or 500 at a time to probably Japan as carpenters or plumbers. We were all had a specialty of some kind, and the Japanese took advantage. Some of them were sent to Kawasaki to the steel mills, and others were building a dam in the middle of winter, and they'd take the cement sacks, which, as you know, are well, and they cause blisters, and the guys would make jackets out of the cement sacks, and they'd end up with big ulcers and burns for the raw cement. But they were building a dam on Camp 18, which was one of the worst camps. I think 90 guys died there one winter.
Morrison-Knudsen guys?
Morrison-Knudsen guys.
What about the Red Cross? Did you have any Red Cross
the Red Cross tried to get in, but the Japanese interceded, and when the Red Cross boxes started arriving, the Japanese would make 5 of our men share one box, and they'd take 5 boxes for each of their men. It was ridiculous. They took all of those and pilfered those boxes all the years we were in prison camp.
You were really cut off from the world.
Yeah.
How long before you were able to write your first letter to your family?
6 months.
And what were you allowed to write?
Not much. Just that I am in the Shanghai prison camp. I'm alive and well. Don't worry about me. They treat me fine. If you didn't, they'd censor the damn thing and out it would go. So we learned the hard way to make it sound good. And
how long before you received any mail from home, or did you?
Probably a year.
Was that pretty emotional when you received your first letter?
It was very emotional because they had pictures in it.
And the Japanese let you keep that?
Yes. It depended on their mood for that day. But usually they'd show you a letter addressed to you, and then they'd burn it. They wanted to keep us under their foot all the time. But
so you were you in this camp then till 45, or were you moved around?
No, I was taken out of Kangwon by myself in 1944, June the 6th, because I had put down on one of the sheets they interrogated us that I had been in radio as an announcer, and I thought nothing could be more worthless than a radio announcer. But they decided that I had the all-American voice, and they were going to put me on JOAK shortwave and read messages, which I did all day long except Sunday.
What kind of messages did you read?
Again, messages from the other prisoners. I'm alive and well. I'm in the Tokyo camp. Don't worry about me, and so forth.
So not propaganda, then just true messages about
True
you.
messages, but the Japanese reasoned, because their propaganda had failed before, that the messages from the prisoners would show them they had a soft side, and they were truly trying to help the war effort.
And where were you taken to do this? You were moved from that camp then in 1944?
I was moved to a camp called Bunka. 25 men with radio experience or newspaper experience or on the stage experience. In other words, they wanted a little propaganda corps in itself in this camp. And we were taken by a charcoal burning car to the studio in downtown Tokyo every day but Sunday. And I'll never forget, every time we'd start down, the air raid siren would sound, and the planes would use Fujiyama, which was an aiming point for them, no matter where they were bombing in Japan. And they'd come right over our camp, 29s. I saw every 29 that was ever built.
How did you feel about that when you saw
Oh,
the 29s?
I was scared to death. And when we went to the studio to try and broadcast these messages, the studio was lined with Japanese people thinking that we were Americans and they wouldn't bomb Americans, so they were safe. And when the Americans started dropping firebombs, M69s, it was burning at 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It would hit on the building, and the Japanese would hit it with a shovel and splatter it, and it would just, they didn't learn for a long time that the only way they could control that was by sand and dumping it on to get the oxygen out of it.
How far from Tokyo was your camp?
It was right in Tokyo.
So you were there during the fire bombings?
You bet.
At the end by the 29th. Tell me what that was like.
Well, it was terrible. I mean, for a long time, the 29s came in at 15, 20,000 feet, but the Jap stream was taking them off course and the bombs off course. So this Carl LeMay decided to come in at 30-second intervals right on the deck. I mean, he couldn't have been 1,000 feet high in some of those planes. One raid we had started at midnight and was still going on at 4:30 the next morning.
Did it give you a feeling of attachment to the American soldier, I mean to the military though, to the Air Corps?
No, the only thing we felt is we hope they miss our camp. There was a lot of camps that they didn't miss.
Did you have a sense of the war ending at any time? Did you ever think you'd get home again?
I don't think so. No, I don't really think so, because the Japanese are pretty stubborn, and we thought nothing could make these people surrender. On the first atomic bomb, we were at a camp called Bunka, and we were flooded with Japanese officers wanting to know what that was. We'd never heard of it. We didn't know what an atomic bomb was. The only thing we had heard of was that in Europe they had dropped 2,000-pound blockbusters, and we thought that's what it was. And this guy said, no, the whole city is gone.
Now, when you say they asked, did they interrogate you, or
Yes.
were you on a more friendly basis at any point?
No, they interrogated
I
us.
see, and wanted to know what that was.
What that was.
Is that how you found out about the first atomic bomb
I don't
dropped?
remember how I found out, really. I know later we found out that Tokyo was the third place to be bombed, and we're glad we got out of there in time. But
were there ever any friendly Japanese? Did you ever have any good experiences?
we had a man called Demoto-san who played piano like, I mean, he had American jazz down pat. And he used to, you know, bring us news that he could. And he says, beware, the Japanese are the greatest propagandists in the world. And we found out later they would lie to their own people, you know, if it was to their benefit. And we had this one little interpreter who was meek and mild and said, tell me about what happens if the Americans land on Japan. We said they'll all be colored men from Texas with a razor in one hand and a broken beer bottle in the other and slice their way through Tokyo. And it scared him to death. He just turned white. Anyway, this one other Japanese said, if you guys think we're going to leave you here to bury us, you're crazy in hell. We'll bury you first. And I don't doubt that it was lucky that any prisoner of war got out of Japan.
You say that you received pictures from home?
Yes.
What did you do with the pictures? How did you preserve those?
I kept them under my pillow and hung on them real tight, and would look at them twice a day for a year, because the Japanese, once you got the letter, they didn't take it away from you. They only burned it before they gave it to you.
You were married during this time? You were married before you were captured?
I were married.
And so your wife would send you letters also, or pictures?
Well, she sent some pictures till she heard I was beheaded in Tokyo. And I think the Red Cross did say, because I was missing from the time I got on the Nidomaru in June until they ended up in Bunka camp late July. So 6 weeks there, they heard nothing from me.
Tell me about the day the war ended.
Well, you'd think that this built-up emotion, there'd be a loud scream and yell. When the planes, I mean the small planes, F-6Fs, came over our camp and dropped a part of a pack of cigarettes with a note, "We'll be back with more." And we knew then the war was over, and B-29 started flying over our camp, and they'd drop shoes and bags of clothing and everything, and the parachutes would break, so this would be on a free fall. And it was very dangerous because we couldn't decide where to go to hide. Once this came down, you could be hit by even though we were American. Anyway,
what were your Japanese captors doing when the war ended?
They were scared to death.
Did they run away?
They ran away, and they tried to get out of the prison camps where they had been mean, because they knew that we'd get even with them. And usually they managed to get out before the Americans took over and said, "Do what you want." This Captain Sasson, who was a Marine, later I think was governor of Minnesota, Harold Sasson. Anyway, he got up on this platform and he addressed all of us. And he said, "You Marines, I want you to act like Marines. You prisoners of war, do anything you want, but don't miss the Higgins boats out to the hospital ship." And so he practically told us, do anything you want as far as getting even is concerned.
And what did people do to get even then?
They beat hell out of every Jap they could get a hold of.
Were you there for any period of time before the Americans actually came in? Were you just there by yourselves?
We were there by ourselves, but the Japanese didn't tell us until the 20th, let's see, they took us out of camp on the 18th. The 23rd of the month, they told us the war was over. But it had been over for 2 weeks. And then small planes, F-6Fs and Gullwing Corsairs, came over our camp, and they dropped part of a pack of cigarettes and opened up their 50 calibers, and we were on a little island. It'd spray water up, and the Japanese were scared to death. When the 29s dropped supplies, if some of them landed outside camp, the Japanese would come in with it in their hand and humbly say, "This is yours." You never saw such a change in your life. They knew what was coming to them.
Did you board a hospital ship and then left?
I boarded the hospital ship Benevolence. It was kept there because I had yellow jaundice so bad I could have nothing but fruit juice. And I was laying there in that sick bay and watch these damn Dutchmen come in, and they'd take a slice of that homemade bread, dump the sugar bowl on it, put a pound of butter more on it, and I just got sick in my stomach of that grease. But they...
Because what had you been eating for 4 years? What had your diet been?
Rice and stew, but the rice, you wouldn't call it rice. It was swept off the store floors, and it had feathers and nails and rocks and wood in it, and we finally learned to clean it up with a little sluice box.
Did you cook for yourselves?
They let a crew go cook for us, and then they would let another crew from the barracks serve the meal out of a 5-gallon bucket.
Did you weren't allowed to grow any food or do anything for yourself independently of that? How much weight did you lose?
I weighed 95 after 165 when I went overseas.
So you were on the hospital ship, and did they?
And they kept me there. They wouldn't let me off until they were assured that I would have nothing but fruit juice. Then I was taken to the airport, flown to Okinawa, and later flown to Manila to a replacement camp, and was there 6 weeks.
When did your family find out you were alive and that you were coming home?
Soon after the war was over, because they let us send cablegrams.
Were any of your guys taken with you? Did you stay together at all once you were taken out of Japan?
I stayed pretty well with my buddies. One was a Dr. Frank Crow, the very well-known doctor whose father helped build, what's the big dam, Hoover Dam? Frank Crow Sr. Anyway, Frankie and I were together all the time, and
because I would think that being separated after being together for so many years together and so close, the separation would have been pretty tough.
It was pretty tough.
From each other, yeah. So you were when were you actually? Did you actually get to come home and come back to Meridian?
In October of 1945. And we had a convention or reunion that first year. We had talked about it in prison camp and never really thinking that it would happen. But we had from October till December to get letters out, and we had over 300 people attend that first convention at the Hotel Boise.
What year did you have that?
1945, December 6th, 7th, and 8th.
Must have been heartwarming to see
it was
so
heartwarming,
many of these men.
These
there.
guys were, I mean, they were turned loose. They were worse than I mean, who were the guys that, Shriners? We were much worse.
How old were you when you arrived back in Meridian, Idaho?
26.
Had you had any contact from Mr. Morrison or from the Morrison-Knudsen company?
I had the privilege of introducing Ann and Harry Morrison on Wake Island when they came through to visit us.
When did they do that?
In 1941.
So you had met them?
Oh, yes, and my father was a very good friend of Harry Morrison's. In fact, that's how I got to go to Wake Island, because of that friendship. Because when Doyle Manser and I went out to try and go, they said, we're full, sorry, no more employees. And then they found out that I had a little
you were connected.
Secret gift there.
You came home to Meridian, to your family. What did that feel like?
Terribly emotionally. I mean, I can't think of it now.
They probably could have no way to relate to the life you'd lived for 4 years.
No.
There was no way. You
no
couldn't
way.
begin to explain it to them. No.
Well, most of us didn't talk about it for a while, and then my wife later said the only thing he would talk about was the good things that happened, the fun things, but he wouldn't go into the deep, dark things that this psychiatrist in Boulder got out of me.
What about at the convention? Did the guys...
Oh, they were just
talk?
Happy-go-lucky, and of course, at that time, we were trying to get legislation passed to give us veterans
rights.
Rights.
Were you surprised when you came home that those were not even in the works? That
Very
was not
surprised,
that was not even
because
a consideration?
every convention we had a legislative committee who would try to get something done through the governors or senators or representatives, and nothing. Then out of frustration in 1978, I wrote a letter to President Jimmy Carter, and I got 9 replies back from various people. The most important was from Captain Mary Pruitt at the Pentagon, and she said, I think you're eligible as a Wake group under 95-202, a recently passed law. So we answered all her questions and the criteria. She took it to a military board of review, and they said, yes, you're eligible, but to get your DD-214 and an honorable discharge, you have to get a buddy letter or tell us how you defended Wake Island individually. By Christmas, most of the men had received their discharge and DD-214.
When you came home and your wife found out you had not been beheaded, this is in 1945, what happened?
Well, she had remarried because...
Oh, she divorced you while you were a prisoner of war?
She divorced me from a Mexican quickie divorce.
Did you know that while you were a prisoner of war?
No, I didn't until I wired my folks from Manila, and they said June has remarried an Army captain and will not be with us. They came to Seattle to pick me up.
Were you stunned?
I was very stunned.
So they picked you up, your parents, and brought you back here?
Yeah, and my former wife sold everything, my clothes, our car, even down to my shoes. Nothing was sacred.
Did you stay in Meridian at that point?
No, I stayed in Boise. My folks had a home in Boise.
Yeah. So you adjusted to being back at home and the war being over?
I tried to,
yeah.
and I wonder if I ever got really adjusted.
What did you do with your life at that point?
I went back into radio announcing. I was an announcer for KDSH for many, many years, and then they later became KBOI, and I had a morning show with a Bruce Whitehead. We were on every morning at 6 o'clock and outdistanced Arthur Godfrey at that time. It was a very important two-man show.
When did you produce this?
1949.
Tell me about why you decided to make this record, this recording.
Well, we had a writer that came in once a week and wrote a story for Simplot called The Idaho Story. And he decided that my story was good enough to put on this half-hour program. Well, when I heard the half hour, I said, let's do something more and put the whole hour together. And so that was born. If you'll notice on the back, all those people that took a voice part were announcers or salespeople at KDSH. And I have actually the voice of Major Devereaux on there. And Major Devereaux has since then died. At the time I called Washington, D.C. and asked him to do this for me, he was a congressman from Maryland. Was
this difficult to produce for you?
Yes, time-consuming.
In terms of emotional reliving of what happened, because
right.
It's an excellent production, I've heard it.
Well, now you have the original, the album I tore up to send you.
Yes.
Anyway, it's now on a CD, and because not many people have the phonograph to play that long play anymore.
This is a wonderful, well, I'll save this till the last. So you met someone else and remarried?
Yes, I met a very lovely girl and married in 1946. We've celebrated 57 years together.
Did you have any children?
No.
Were you?
Well, that's not right. Of course we had 3 children. Why would I say no? Anyway.
You might have been thinking of the first wife.
Yeah, the first wife, we didn't have any children.
But you have 3 children, and what is your wife's name?
Laura.
Laura, and what you had boys or girls?
We had 2 boys and a girl, and lost 1 boy when he was 15 and a half. But we have an older son now that lives in Boise, and a daughter who has been living in Anaheim, California. But they came to visit us in Boise, fell in love with the place, went out and bought a home in, at Locust Grove in Meridian, and they're moving up next week to Meridian. She loves it. And
do you have grandchildren?
You bet. Great-grandchildren.
Oh, that's wonderful.
But
have you ever been back to Wake Island?
Twice.
And what was that like?
Well, it was better than I thought. I thought, you know, my emotions will run wild, but they were pretty calm, and I evidently didn't associate all the bad things on Wake Island as much as I did the good times I had before war, because it was a wonderful vacation and getting paid an enormous sum in 1941.
Did Morrison Knudsen pay you for the entire time you were
they tried to. The government again says, mind your own business, Harry. So we had a torts claim passed, and it gave us so much out of our salary for the time we spent in prison camp. But in those days, what we really needed was housing benefit or education benefits, and that was all denied us. We were mavericks.
You weren't allowed to go with the GI Bill?
No, not till 1981. And then, as I say, this Captain Pruitt wrote us and told us how to go about it. We answered all her questions. I took what publications I could find, got on a plane in Salt Lake City and flew to Boise and met with 7 of my buddies. We stayed with it night and day till we got all the questions answered, sent a cover letter, and in 60 days had word back that we were accepted.
That is wonderful, quite a feat. And how wonderful for all of the other men who were captured.
It has been a godsend to us, because getting full benefits to the veterans now is an insurance policy you couldn't possibly buy.
Well, Mr. Dodds, I cannot even begin to tell you what an honor it is to have you come to the Warhawk Air Museum and allow us the honor of preserving your history this way. You are a great American and a great veteran.
Thank you, Sue.
And we wish you well in your life, and we hope that you'll come here to visit us. And we especially want to thank you for the America that we have today, because of men like you that sacrifice so much of your own lives. We have this wonderful free world that we live in today. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.